March 15, 2024, 9:47 p.m., the Copper Grill, Seattle. Kira Ashford had served 3 tours protecting high-value targets in places where mortar rounds spoke louder than diplomacy. Tonight, she was protecting soup specials and dodging the wandering hands of investment bankers who thought a $50 tip bought them more than prompt refills. The burn scar on her right palm, souvenir from an IED training accident outside Fort Bragg in 2019, ached when rain was coming. It was aching now. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle's downtown lights blurred behind sheets of water that turned the streets into rivers of neon and regret. She didn't know that in 13 minutes she'd have to choose between hiding forever or protecting the man whose father had destroyed hers. The dining room held 47 customers. Kira had counted them twice. 6 exits, including the kitchen loading dock. 2 armed security personnel stationed near the private alcoves, ankle holsters poorly concealed beneath cheap suit pants. The weight of the water pitcher in her hand registered at 2.4 pounds, ceramic construction, adequate as a defensive tool if thrown with proper trajectory. 7 steps to the kitchen. 2.3 seconds at combat speed. These calculations happened without conscious thought, muscle memory from a life she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. Table 12 drew her attention again. The man seated there moved like someone who expected ambush. Shoulders never relaxed, eyes tracked every entrance and exit with the methodical precision of a surveillance specialist. Rhett Blackwood, 35 years old, owner of half the commercial real estate between Pike Place Market and the waterfront. The Seattle Times called him a legitimate businessman. The FBI called him a person of interest. Kira called him the son of the man whose empire had swallowed her father whole. She'd been watching Rhett Blackwood for 6 months, learning his patterns, his security rotations, the route he took from his penthouse to his favorite restaurants. Tonight she'd planned to approach him after his meal, deliver the message her father had died trying to send. But fate had a sense of timing that made mockery of careful plans. A young waiter named Emmett stumbled near the sommelier station, red wine cascading across white tablecloth like arterial spray. The customer, some tech executive whose stock options had convinced him he mattered, exploded from his chair with the kind of rage only the newly wealthy could muster. Philip, the maitre d', descended with vicious efficiency, his voice a hiss of barely contained fury. Kira stepped between them before conscious thought caught up with instinct. Her voice came out flat, empty of emotion, the tone she'd used to diffuse checkpoint confrontations in war zones. "I'll handle it." She cleaned the mess with movements that suggested this was routine, not crisis. Slipped Emmett a $20 bill while the customer settled back into his chair, mollified by her efficiency. The kid's hands were shaking. "Breathe. First month's always hardest." Emmett nodded, throat working, and retreated to the kitchen before Philip could unleash another verbal lashing. The restaurant resumed its rhythm of clinking silverware and manufactured conversation, crisis averted through competence that drew no attention. From the kitchen doorway, Garrett Sr. watched with eyes that had seen too much. 68 years old, Korean War veteran, hands scarred from decades of prep work and the kind of violence that predated his culinary career. He'd recognized something in Kira the day she'd applied for this job. Soldiers always recognize their own. "You got that look again, Kira. The one soldiers get when they're trying not to remember." "Just tired, Garrett." "I was just tired for 40 years. Then I talked to someone." He paused, cleaver resting against the cutting board with the ease of long familiarity. "Talk to someone, kid, before it eats you from the inside." The photo in her apron pocket pressed against her ribs with each breath. Thomas Ashford in dress uniform, American flag behind him, eyes that held the weight of choices made in darkness for people who'd never know his name. 3 years since the explosion at his private security compound in the Mojave Desert. 3 years since the phone call that had ended with static and fire and her father's last words etched into memory like scars. "Kira, if anything happens, Silas Graves set the trap, not Blackwood. Tell Blackwood's son the truth." The line had gone dead. The compound, 40 acres of classified training facilities tucked into California wasteland, had become a crater before sunrise. Official reports called it an accident. Equipment malfunction, faulty propane storage, the kind of convenient explanation that closed investigations before they could ask uncomfortable questions. Kiera knew better. Her father had taught her to read between the lies that powerful men told to cover their sins. The front entrance opened with a gust of wind and rain. 3 armored Cadillac Escalades pulled up to the curb in formation, doors opening in synchronized precision that spoke of rehearsed protocol. 4 bodyguards emerged first, scanning the street with the controlled paranoia of former Special Operations personnel. SEALs, Kira guessed from their movement patterns, the way they created overlapping fields of fire without obvious coordination. Rhett Blackwood stepped out last. Charcoal bespoke suit that probably cost more than Kira made in 6 months. Dark hair swept back, eyes the color of steel in winter. He moved through the restaurant like a man who owned the air he breathed, and maybe he did. In Seattle's shadow economy, the Blackwood name carried weight that transcended law and order. Philip practically melted into the floor, obsequious smile stretching across his face like a wound. "Mr. Blackwood, your usual alcove is ready." Rhett didn't acknowledge him. His gaze swept the dining room with the same systematic assessment Kira had performed earlier. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. She felt the impact like voltage, a jolt of mutual recognition. Not of identity. He had no idea who she was, but of shared instinct. He'd seen her scar when she'd poured water earlier. The puckered tissue on her palm that screamed IED, or close quarters burn. In his world, scars told stories that words couldn't hide. He paused. His eyes narrowed, calculation replacing casual observation. Then he looked away, dismissing her as part of the furniture, and moved toward his private alcove flanked by the 4 bodyguards who arranged themselves with tactical precision around his table. Kira's pulse hammered against her throat. She'd been invisible for 3 years. Invisible kept you alive when powerful men wanted you dead. But Rhett Blackwood had seen her, really seen her, and that changed the equation in ways she couldn't yet calculate. The bodyguards settled into their positions, 2 facing the main entrance, scanning for threats with the methodical rhythm of professionals who understood that complacency killed. The other 2 positioned to cover the kitchen and secondary exits, creating a security envelope that would make approaching Rhett's table an exercise in observed vulnerability. Kira moved to the service station, her hands steady as she prepared a fresh pitcher of ice water. From this angle, she could hear fragments of conversation from the alcove. Rhett's voice, low, controlled, carrying the kind of authority that didn't need volume to command attention. "Silas Graves is meeting Garrett Wolfe tonight at the docks. My brother Declan's managing the shipment. If Silas betrays us, Declan's dead." The words hit Kira like a fist to the solar plexus. Silas Graves. The name her father had whispered with his dying breath. The man who'd orchestrated the Mojave explosion and walked away clean, while Thomas Ashford's reputation burned alongside his body. The pitcher trembled in her grip. She forced her breathing to slow. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The rhythm they'd taught her in intelligence training to control physiological stress responses. Panic got you killed. Discipline kept you functional. Garrett Wolfe. The name belonged to Seattle's newest power player, a crime lord who'd built an empire on weapons trafficking and human misery. Word on the street said he was making moves to consolidate control over the Port Authority, turning Seattle into a distribution hub for every illegal enterprise from Vancouver to San Diego. And Silas Graves was selling out the Blackwood family to make it happen. Kira's mind raced through tactical calculations. If Silas was meeting Wolfe tonight, that meant the betrayal was already in motion. Declan Blackwood, Rhett's younger brother, 30 years old, logistics manager for the family's shipping operations, would be the leverage point. Kill Declan, and Rhett lost his operational infrastructure and the one person he trusted completely. She'd come to Seattle to deliver a message, to tell Rhett Blackwood that his father, Lorenzo, hadn't ordered Thomas Ashford's death, that Silas Graves had acted alone, embezzling millions and covering his tracks with murder and manipulation. But if she waited, if she played it safe and approached Rhett through official channels or intermediaries, Declan would die. Another innocent casualty in a war between men who measured lives in dollars and leverage. Her father's voice echoed in memory, the same lesson he'd drilled into her since childhood. A shield protects, that's the job. Not revenge, not justice, protection. You stand between the threat and the innocent, and you don't move until the threat is neutralized or you're dead. That's what it means to serve. The front entrance opened again. No fanfare this time, no armored vehicles, just 4 men in long trench coats, water streaming from dark fabric as they stepped into the warm glow of the restaurant. They didn't wait to be seated, didn't acknowledge Philip's attempt to greet them. They moved in diamond formation. Kira's training screamed warnings that bypassed conscious analysis. Military movement pattern. Tactical spacing designed for urban combat. The coats were unbuttoned at the bottom despite the rain, allowing rapid access to weapons at the waist. 23 feet from Rhett Blackwood's table, 8 seconds until they reached optimal firing position. The lead man's right hand moved toward his waistline. Kira caught the profile of the weapon, Sig Sauer P226 with AAC Tyrant suppressor, the kind of hardware that didn't appear in civilian hands without serious criminal connections. She recognized the configuration from threat assessment briefings, the same setup used in professional assassinations where noise discipline mattered more than stopping power. Time fractured into crystalline clarity. The restaurant sounds became muffled, distant, as if someone had wrapped the world in cotton. Details sharpened to hyperfocus. The assassin's synchronized breathing. The sweat on Philip's forehead as he finally registered that something was wrong. The bodyguard to Rhett's left checking his phone, attention diverted at the worst possible moment. Kira's position was 15 feet from the approaching threat. The water pitcher in her hand, 2.4 pounds of ceramic momentum. Distance to Rhett's table, 12 feet. The fallen bodyguard's weapon, she could already see it, a Glock 19 holstered at his hip, 15 rounds plus 1 in the chamber if he followed standard protocol. Option A, duck behind the service station. Survive the initial gunfire. Wait for it to be over. Stay invisible. Stay safe. Let Silas Graves remain free to orchestrate more murders, more betrayals, until someone else's father ended up dead in the desert. Option B, intervene. Expose every skill she'd spent 3 years hiding. Become visible to people who'd spent those same years hunting Thomas Ashford's family. Confront the past she'd run from, and force it into a reckoning that could only end in blood. Her father's voice cut through the calculations with the clarity of absolute certainty. A shield protects. That's the job. The scream tore from Kira's throat before conscious thought could second-guess instinct. Gun! The words shattered the restaurant's manufactured ambiance like a grenade through plate glass. Heads snapped toward her. The lead assassin's eyes widened, tactical surprise disrupting his approach rhythm. His weapon hand hesitated, target acquisition interrupted by unexpected awareness. Kira moved. The water pitcher left her hand in a trajectory calculated through muscle memory and repetition. It spun end over end, ceramic catching light, and impacted the assassin's gun hand with bone-breaking force. The Sig Sauer discharged, suppressor reducing the gunshot to a pneumatic cough, but the round went high, punching into ornate ceiling plaster instead of Rhett Blackwood's skull. She was already in motion. The polished oak floor became a ramp as she dropped into a baseball slide, momentum carrying her across 6 feet of space in less time than it took for the pitcher shards to hit the ground. The bodyguard to Rhett's right, Mitchell, 32 years old, father of 2 daughters whose photos Kira had seen on his phone during an earlier shift, never had time to draw his weapon. The second assassin's suppressed round caught Mitchell in the center of his forehead. Blood and brain matter sprayed across white tablecloth. He collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, weight falling forward, and his jacket opened to reveal the Glock 19 holstered at his right hip. Kira's hand closed around the grip before Mitchell's body finished falling. 15 rounds plus 1. She counted automatically, tactical inventory running parallel to physical action. The weight felt right, familiar, an extension of intent shaped by thousands of hours on qualification ranges. First shot, center mass on the lead assassin. double-tap training overriding any hesitation about killing a human being in a public restaurant. The round caught him high in the chest, sternum impact that punched through tactical vest and obliterated his heart. He went down hard, surprise frozen on his face. Second shot, right shoulder of assassin number 2, the one who'd killed Mitchell. Kira's training had emphasized neutralization over termination when circumstances allowed. A shoulder shot destroyed mobility and weapon retention without guaranteed fatality. The man screamed, weapon clattering from nerveless fingers. Third shot, suppressing fire toward assassin number 3, forcing him to abort his advance and dive behind a support column. The round punched into decorative woodwork, sending splinters through the air like shrapnel. The fourth assassin had already pivoted toward Kira, his own weapon tracking to acquire her as a priority target. She rolled left, shoulder hitting hardwood, pain flaring through old injuries. His shot missed by inches, passing through space she'd occupied a heartbeat earlier. The restaurant had descended into chaos, screaming patrons diving under tables, Philip frozen behind the host stand, shock rendering him a statue. Garrett Sr. emerging from the kitchen with a cleaver in his hand, combat instincts overriding retirement and age. Dawson, the second bodyguard to Rhett's left, had taken a round to the throat. He clutched at the wound with both hands, arterial spray pulsing between his fingers in rhythm with his failing heartbeat. 28 years old. 3 weeks ago, Kira had overheard him talking about proposing to his girlfriend. The ring was already purchased, hidden in his apartment, waiting for the right moment. He had maybe 90 seconds before blood loss stole consciousness and death followed close behind. Rhett Blackwood remained frozen behind the overturned table, his face a mask of shock and calculation. Not fear. Kira could read the difference in his expression. He was running threat assessment, trying to understand how a waitress moved like a trained operator and shot like someone who'd done this before. Time resumed its normal flow. The entire engagement had lasted maybe 6 seconds. 2 assassins down, 2 still active. Mitchell and Dawson dead or dying, and Kira standing in the center of the kill zone with a smoking Glock and the certainty that her life had just pivoted into territory where retreat was no longer an option. The fourth assassin spoke into a radio clipped to his tactical vest, voice tight with controlled aggression. Target escaped. Execute phase 2. The brother. The words hit Kira with the force of prophecy. They weren't just here to kill Rhett. This was coordinated. Simultaneous strikes designed to decapitate the Blackwood organization in a single night. While these men tied up Rhett's security and attention, another team would be moving on Declan. She grabbed Rhett's arm, hauling him toward the kitchen with strength born from adrenaline and desperation. Her voice came out hard, empty of anything except tactical necessity. Kitchen, now! Move or die! For a heartbeat, she thought he'd resist, that pride or shock would override survival instinct. Then his expression cleared, training or intelligence catching up with circumstance, and he moved. They ran together through the swinging doors as the third and fourth assassins opened fire behind them, rounds punching into stainless steel and tile. The kitchen was a maze of prep stations and industrial equipment. Garrett Sr. stood near the walk-in cooler, cleaver still in hand, eyes sharp with the clarity of someone who'd faced death before and made peace with its inevitability. Loading dock, 30 seconds before they flank. Kira nodded. No time for explanation or gratitude. She pulled Rhett through the kitchen toward the rear exit, past hanging pots and racks of wine bottles. Behind them, the sound of pursuit, boots on tile, tactical communication in clipped syllables. They burst through the loading dock door into rain that hit like ice water. The alley stretched away into darkness, dumpsters and delivery trucks creating a corridor of shadows. Thunder rolled overhead, or maybe it was the sound of her pulse hammering in her ears. Rhett stumbled, catching himself against wet brick. His breathing came hard, not from exertion but from the crash of adrenaline meeting reality. He turned to face Kira, and in his eyes she saw the question forming before he could voice it. How did a waitress? I'm not a waitress. The words came out flat, final. I'm Thomas Ashford's daughter, and the men who just tried to kill you work for Silas Graves. Recognition flared in his expression. Not of her name, he'd never known Thomas Ashford had a daughter, but of the circumstances that had brought them to this moment. His father Lorenzo's last words before cancer claimed him, the deathbed confession about Silas's betrayal, the safety deposit box key pressed into Rhett's hand with shaking fingers, and the whispered instruction to find the truth. "My brother. They're going after Declan right now. Where is he?" Rhett pulled a phone from his jacket, fingers moving with practiced speed. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. A muscle in his jaw tightened, the only outward sign of the fear that had to be tearing through him. "Port of Seattle, Pier 41, Warehouse District. He's managing a shipment inspection with 2 guards, ex-Rangers, Fletcher and Whitmore." Kira was already moving, running toward the street where the assassin's vehicle would be parked. A black Dodge Charger sat at the curb, engine running, driver's door unlocked. Tactical error. They'd expected a quick hit and fast extraction. Their mistake was Kira's opportunity. She slid behind the wheel, Rhett diving into the passenger seat as she threw the transmission into drive. The Charger's V8 roared, tires breaking loose on wet asphalt as she accelerated into traffic. Behind them, figures emerged from the restaurant's loading dock. The remaining assassins, weapons drawn, but already too late to stop the escape. The GPS showed Declan's location, 12 minutes away through Seattle's downtown maze. Kira pushed the Charger to 85 miles per hour, weaving through lanes with the controlled aggression of someone who'd done high-speed evasive driving in circumstances where failure meant death. Rhett gripped the dashboard, knuckles white, but his voice stayed level. "Fort Benning, evasive driving course, 2018. Among other things. 2 black SUVs materialized in the rearview mirror, Wolf's backup team, responding to the failed hit with backup protocol. They accelerated hard, closing distance with the kind of driving that suggested professional pursuit training. Pike Street stretched ahead, tourist traps and restaurants giving way to the approach toward Pike Place Market. Late evening traffic thinned but didn't disappear. Civilians in the equation, potential collateral damage that turned tactical decisions into moral calculations. The first SUV pulled alongside, passenger window dropping. Kira saw the weapon rising. Shotgun, probably 12 gauge, loaded with buckshot or slugs designed to disable vehicles through engine block destruction. She jerked the wheel right, slamming into the SUV's front quarter panel with enough force to trigger the Charger's airbag warnings. Metal screamed against metal. The SUV driver overcorrected, momentum carrying his vehicle toward parked cars. Kira accelerated out of the collision, gaining separation. In her peripheral vision, she caught Rhett's expression, not fear, not shock, but something approaching respect. "Who trained you?" "My father, before the army taught me to make it official." The second SUV rammed them from behind, impact sending the Charger into a fishtail that she corrected through counter-steering and throttle control. They were approaching the market now, tourist crowds long gone, but the streets still alive with late-night vendors and street musicians packing up for the evening. Kira saw the opening, narrow alley between 2 brick buildings, barely wide enough for the Charger, but impossible for the larger SUVs. She cranked the wheel left, threading the gap with inches to spare on either side. The side mirrors folded back with sharp cracks as bricks scraped paint from both flanks. The SUVs tried to follow. The first one made it 5 feet before width exceeded clearance. The grinding shriek of metal on brick echoed through the alley as the vehicle wedged itself between buildings, blocking the path for the second pursuer. Kira emerged onto Western Avenue, gaining distance, buying time. The port was close now. 8 minutes if traffic cooperated. 8 minutes to save Declan Blackwood and confront the man who'd murdered her father. Her hands ached from gripping the wheel. The scar tissue on her right palm burned with phantom heat, the old injury protesting stress and adrenaline. But her mind stayed clear, focused on the tactical problem ahead. "Tell me about Fletcher and Whitmore. Combat experience, skill level, loyalty." Rhett processed the question, understanding that she was building an operational picture. Fletcher's former Army Ranger, 3 deployments, expert marksman. Loyal to the family since my father pulled him out of a bad situation in Tacoma 5 years ago. Whitmore's Rangers 2, demolition specialist, family man, 3 kids, both solid. Against how many of Wolf's people? Unknown. But if Silas is there personally, he'll have brought a full crew. Minimum 8 operators, maybe 12. The numbers weren't encouraging. Kira had a Glock with 14 rounds remaining. Rhett was unarmed. She'd seen him check his waistband earlier, confirming the absence of concealed carry. Against a dozen trained killers, their odds sat somewhere between slim and suicidal. But Declan was family, and families were worth dying for, even when the math suggested you should run. Pier 41 materialized through the rain like a graveyard of rusted ambition. Warehouses stretched along the waterfront in various states of decay, their corrugated metal sides streaked with salt spray and years of neglect. The Charger's headlights cut through the darkness, broken only by sodium lamps that flickered with the irregular rhythm of failing infrastructure. Kira killed the lights 2 blocks out, navigating by memory and the faint glow of Seattle's skyline reflected off low clouds. The engine's rumble seemed deafening in the industrial silence. She brought the vehicle to a stop behind a shipping container that had rusted through in places, creating abstract patterns of decay that spoke to the port's slow death under mismanagement and corruption. The warehouse Declan managed sat 200 yards ahead. No lights visible through grimy windows, no movement in the surrounding parking area where delivery trucks should have been staged for morning operations. Rhett leaned forward, tension radiating from his frame like heat. Fletcher always parks his F-150 by the loading dock. I don't see it. Kira scanned the area through eyes trained to read absence as evidence. 2 vehicles sat in the lot, a silver Lexus that matched Declan's registration, and a black panel van with no plates. The van's rear doors hung slightly open, dark fabric visible inside that could have been tactical gear or body bags, depending on how badly this night had already gone wrong. She pulled the Glock from her waistband, checked the magazine out of habit rather than necessity. 13 rounds remaining, not enough for sustained firefight, but adequate for surgical intervention if she could control the engagement parameters. Stay in the car. Rhett's hand caught her wrist, grip firm enough to communicate intent without aggression. That's my brother in there. Which is why you stay here. He needs you alive more than he needs you dead trying to be a hero. Something shifted in his expression, pride warring with tactical reality. He released her wrist but didn't retreat. I've got 3 years of Krav Maga training, and I grew up in this business. I'm not dead weight. Kira evaluated him with the cold assessment of someone who'd watched civilians get killed because they'd overestimated their capabilities in kinetic situations. But she'd also seen determination keep people alive when skill failed them. And Rhett carried himself with the controlled readiness of someone who'd faced violence before. You move when I move. You shoot when I shoot. You don't be a hero, you don't freeze up. And if I tell you to run, you sprint like your life depends on it, because it will. Clear? Clear. They exited the Charger in synchronized silence. Rain had intensified to a steady downpour that reduced visibility to 50 feet and turned every sound into white noise. Tactical advantage and disadvantage simultaneously. It concealed their approach but also masked threats until engagement range collapsed to distances where mistakes became fatal. The warehouse's side entrance showed signs of forced entry. Lock mechanism twisted, metal frame bent where a pry bar had levered the door from its housing. Blood on the handle, fresh enough that rain hadn't diluted it to pink streaks. Kira pressed her palm against the door, feeling for vibration that might indicate activity inside. Nothing. She pushed it open, inch by inch, Glock tracking the expanding sightline, finger indexed along the frame until threat assessment demanded trigger engagement. The interior smelled of copper and cordite underneath the pervasive odor of mildew and machine oil. Emergency lighting provided minimal illumination, casting everything in shades of amber and shadow. Shipping containers were stacked in neat rows, creating corridors that turned the warehouse into a 3-dimensional maze designed for ambush. Fletcher lay 15 feet inside, throat opened by a blade that had severed carotid and trachea with the clinical precision of someone who'd killed this way before. His eyes stared at nothing. Blood pooled beneath his head in a spreading darkness that reflected emergency lighting like a mirror of violence. Rhett inhaled sharply but didn't speak. His jaw clenched hard enough that Kira could see the muscle jump beneath skin. She touched his shoulder once, acknowledgement of loss, reminder of mission, and moved deeper into the warehouse. Whitmore was slumped against a shipping container 20 feet further in. Two rounds center mass, tight grouping that suggested professional marksmanship rather than spray-and-pray desperation. His service weapon remained holstered. They'd shot him before he could draw, which meant either ambush from concealment or someone he'd trusted enough to let inside his guard. The warehouse opened into a central floor space where containers formed walls around a clearing. Voices echoed from that direction, distorted by metal and distance, but carrying the unmistakable cadence of interrogation. Kira signaled Rhett to hold position, then advanced alone. Her boots made no sound on concrete wet with rain that leaked through holes in the corrugated ceiling. Years of practice had taught her to move through hostile territory like smoke, present but intangible, there and gone before perception could coalesce into recognition. She reached the edge of the container maze and peered around rusted metal into the clearing beyond. Declan Blackwood knelt in the center of the space, hands zip-tied behind his back, duct tape across his mouth. Blood ran from a split above his left eyebrow where someone had struck him hard enough to open skin to bone. His eyes tracked movement with the desperate awareness of prey that understood the predator was simply deciding when to feed. Silas Graves stood over him with a folding knife in his right hand. 52 years old, silver hair cut military short, face weathered by decades of violence disguised as legitimate business. He wore an expensive suit despite the warehouse setting, maintaining the appearance of respectability even while orchestrating murder. 4 men flanked him in tactical formation. Professional security contractors by their bearing and equipment, body armor beneath civilian clothes, weapons held with the casual competence of operators who'd spent years in conflict zones where hesitation meant death. Silas pressed the blade against Declan's throat, not cutting yet, but promising. "Your brother's already dead. The restaurant team confirmed the kill 15 minutes ago. You're holding on to loyalty for a ghost. Give me the shipping codes, and I'll make this quick. Keep playing hero, and I'll make it last until sunrise." Declan's eyes blazed with defiance, despite the terror that had to be churning through his mind. He shook his head, the motion small but absolute. Silas sighed with theatrical regret. "Your father would be disappointed. Lorenzo understood that empires are built on pragmatism, not sentiment. He knew when to adapt and when to cut losses." Kira's finger tightened on the Glock's trigger. 4 targets plus Silas at varying distances and angles, 13 rounds. Math that worked on paper, but relied on perfect accuracy and 0 mistakes in execution. Fletcher and Whitmore had been rangers with combat experience, and they'd died without firing a shot. Overconfidence would get Declan killed, and probably her alongside him. Rhett materialized beside her, moving with surprising stealth for someone without military training. His face had gone pale, but his hands were steady. He looked at his brother, kneeling in blood and duct tape, and something hardened in his expression that went beyond anger into the cold territory where vengeance lived. "I can create a distraction. Draw their fire while you get Declan out. You'll die. Maybe, but he lives. That's the trade I'm willing to make." Kira grabbed his arm before he could do something noble and stupid. Her mind raced through tactical options, discarding scenarios that ended in casualty rates she wasn't prepared to accept. Then she remembered the panel van outside, doors hanging open, tactical gear visible inside. The van. What's in tactical gear that makes noise? Rhett processed the question, following her logic toward conclusion. Flashbangs. Maybe grenades if they brought full loadout. Can you get to it without being seen? Through the side corridor. 30 seconds. Do it. When you hear me engage, you light up that van like the 4th of July and get Declan to the charger. Don't stop, don't look back, and don't wait for me. Understanding crossed his face, along with the recognition that she was giving him the survival option while keeping the suicide mission for herself. He started to protest, but she cut him off with a look that had ended arguments with superior officers in combat zones. "Your brother needs you alive. Go." He went, disappearing into the container maze with surprising efficiency. Kira counted to 30, giving him time to reach the van and locate whatever pyrotechnics Wolf's team had brought for urban warfare applications. Silas had started cutting, shallow slices along Declan's collarbone, drawing blood and pain without causing immediately fatal trauma. The kind of torture designed to break will rather than end life. Kira stepped into the clearing, Glock raised, voice carrying the flat authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Step away from him." 5 heads snapped toward her in synchronized surprise. Silas's knife hand froze mid-stroke. His eyes widened in recognition that took a moment to process, not of her face, but of the implications her presence represented. "Thomas Ashford's daughter. You're supposed to be dead. The California explosion." "My father died. I didn't. And he told me everything before Silas Graves murdered him." The 4 contractors had already moved into tactical response, weapons rising, spacing adjusting to create overlapping fields of fire. Professional threat assessment, prioritizing the armed intruder over the bound prisoner. Silas smiled, the expression carrying no warmth whatsoever. $32 million bought your father's death. I wonder what your life is worth. Probably less than the ammunition required to end it. Then you'll die wondering. The explosion came from outside the warehouse, a percussive blast that shook the building's frame and sent startled birds fleeing from the rafters. Secondary detonations followed as Rhett apparently discovered grenades alongside the flashbangs and decided that maximum chaos served their tactical interests. The 4 contractors spun toward the sound, training overriding discipline for a crucial half-second. Kira shot the nearest one, left shoulder, round punching through trapezius muscle and shattering clavicle. He dropped, weapon clattering across concrete. She rolled right as return fire chewed up the space she'd occupied, rounds sparking off metal containers. Came up firing, double tap to the second contractor's center mass. Body armor caught the first round, but kinetic impact staggered him. The second shot punched through the gap where his vest didn't cover his armpit, penetrating lung and heart in rapid succession. 8 rounds remaining, 3 threats, plus Silas. The math was getting tight. The third contractor had taken cover behind a forklift, using the engine block as protection while he acquired target. Kira couldn't get an angle without exposing herself to the 4th contractor who'd moved to flank her position from the right. She heard boots on concrete behind her, Rhett, sprinting through the chaos with Declan over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. Blood streaked his shirt where he'd cut his brother's restraints with what looked like Fletcher's knife. They were heading for the side exit. Escape route clear if Kira could keep the remaining contractors occupied long enough for them to reach the charger. The 4th contractor tracked them with his weapon, finger tightening on trigger. Kira didn't have time to aim, just pointed and fired 3 rapid shots that stitched across his position. One caught him in the thigh, arterial hit that sent him down screaming and clutching the wound. 5 rounds left, 2 threats remaining. Silas had grabbed a pistol from one of the fallen contractors. Looked like a Sig Sauer P320, standard carry weapon for professional security types. He fired wildly in Kira's direction, suppressing rather than hitting, buying time for the 3rd contractor to reposition for a clean shot. Kira sprinted toward a shipping container, boots hammering concrete. Rounds chased her, close enough that she felt the displacement of air as bullets passed inches from vital organs. She dove behind cover as automatic fire chewed into metal with the distinctive rapid percussion of a submachine gun on full auto. The 3rd contractor had switched weapons to something with higher rate of fire, probably an MP5 or similar platform. He was laying down suppressive fire to keep her pinned while Silas moved to flank. Basic small unit tactics executed with professional competence. Kira's tactical assessment suggested she had maybe 10 seconds before Silas reached an angle where shipping containers no longer provided protection. Running would expose her to the 3rd contractor's fields of fire. Holding position meant getting shot when Silas rounded the corner. She looked up. The shipping containers were stacked 3 high in places, creating elevated positions that would provide superior angles and unexpected attack vectors. The climb would be exposed, but the alternative was staying grounded and dying when tactical geometry closed her options to 0. She holstered the Glock and climbed, using container ridges and locking mechanisms as hand and footholds. Her arms burned with the exertion, muscles screaming protest after the adrenaline and violence of the past hour. The damaged tissue on her palm protested against rough metal edges. Silas appeared below, weapon tracking empty space where Kira should have been cornered. Confusion crossed his face, calculation trying to reconcile expectations with evidence. Kira drew the Glock and fired from above, 3 rounds in rapid succession. 2 caught Silas in the right shoulder and upper arm, shattering bone and destroying muscle tissue. The third punched through his suit jacket without connecting with flesh, wasted ammunition in circumstances where every round mattered. He went down hard, pistol sliding across concrete beyond his reach. His face contorted with pain and rage and the bitter recognition that he'd underestimated the daughter of a man he'd murdered. 2 rounds remaining, 1 threat active. The third contractor had heard the shots and was advancing on Kira's position with tactical caution. She could track his approach by the sound of boots on concrete, measured steps that suggested military discipline rather than civilian panic. She waited, controlling her breathing, letting him close the distance until he entered the kill zone beneath her elevated position. When his head appeared in her sight picture, she put a round through his skull from above, execution angle that gave him no chance to respond or retreat. 1 round left. Silas Graves, wounded but alive in the clearing below. Kira descended the containers, landing hard enough that her ankles protested the impact. Silas had crawled several feet toward his dropped weapon, leaving a blood trail that painted his desperation across concrete. She kicked the pistol away and pressed her boot against his wounded shoulder, applying pressure that drew a scream from lungs starved for oxygen. "My father tried to warn Lorenzo Blackwood, tried to expose your embezzlement. You killed him to cover your crimes, and you let Thomas Ashford die believing he'd failed." Silas spat blood, his face pale from shock and hemorrhage. "Your father was a mercenary, a killer for hire. Don't dress him up as a hero just because you need to believe he mattered." Protection, not punishment. That was the code her father had drilled into her since childhood. The moment you became the executioner, you lost what made the shield worth carrying. Kira lowered the Glock. She pulled zip ties from her pocket, habit from military intelligence work where detainee processing had been routine, and bound Silas's wrist despite his wounded shoulder. His screams echoed through the warehouse, but she worked with mechanical efficiency, ensuring the restraints were tight enough to prevent escape. "You'll stand trial. Answer for Fletcher and Whitmore and my father and everyone else whose blood bought your $32 million. That's justice. Anything else is just murder wearing different clothes." She stood, leaving Silas bleeding and bound in the center of the clearing, returned a cell phone from one of the fallen contractors, encrypted burner, but the emergency call function still worked. Dialed 911 and gave the dispatcher GPS coordinates and a brief description of the scene before dropping the phone and walking toward the exit. Rhett had the charger running when she emerged from the warehouse. Declan sat in the back seat, duct tape removed, hands holding pressure against the shoulder wound. His eyes tracked her with the shell-shocked awareness of someone who'd looked into darkness and found it looking back. She slid into the passenger seat, adrenaline crash beginning to catch up with tactical necessity. Her hands shook slightly as she ejected the Glock's magazine, 1 round remaining, exactly as calculated, and secured the weapon. Rhett pulled away from Pier 41 without speaking, navigating through the industrial district with the controlled focus of someone processing trauma through action. Sirens wailed in the distance, emergency response converging on coordinates that would find Silas Graves and 4 dead contractors, and evidence of violence that would require extensive investigation. 3 blocks from the warehouse, Rhett finally broke the silence. "You could have killed him." "Why didn't you?" "Because becoming the monster to fight monsters just creates more monsters. Someone has to choose differently, or the cycle never ends." They drove through rain-slicked streets toward destinations still uncertain. Behind them, the warehouse district faded into darkness and distance, leaving only consequences and choices in their wake. The safe house Rhett directed them toward sat in Fremont, tucked into a neighborhood of aging craftsman homes and overgrown gardens. The house itself looked abandoned from the street, peeling paint, boarded windows, a lawn gone to seed. Perfect camouflage for a property maintained specifically for emergencies, when the family business encountered complications that required disappearing until threats resolved. Inside, the facade dropped away. The interior was clean, functional, equipped with medical supplies and communications equipment that suggested this wasn't the first time the Blackwood family had needed sanctuary from violence. Kira helped Declan to a couch, while Rhett retrieved a comprehensive trauma kit from a locked cabinet. The shoulder wound needed professional medical attention, but immediate field treatment would stabilize him until moving became safe. "This is going to hurt." Declan nodded, jaw tight. She irrigated the wound with saline, flushing blood and debris, then packed it with hemostatic gauze designed to promote clotting. His breathing came in controlled gasps, but he didn't scream. Pride or shock or discipline overriding the body's natural response to invasive pain. Rhett watched from the doorway, expression unreadable. When Kira finished bandaging his brother's shoulder, he gestured toward a bedroom at the rear of the house. "We need to talk. About my father and yours." The room contained a bed, a desk, and a wall safe hidden behind a landscape painting of Mount Rainier. Rhett worked the combination with practiced efficiency, revealing a stack of documents and a sealed envelope addressed in shaking handwriting. 3 months before he died, my father gave me this. Made me promise not to open it unless something happened to him. Cancer got him before anything else could, but the instructions were clear. If anyone in the family died under suspicious circumstances, I was supposed to read the letter and act on what it contained. He handed the envelope to Kira. The paper felt heavy, quality stock that wealthy men used for important correspondence. Her name was written on the front in Lorenzo Blackwood's hand. For Kira Ashford, the daughter of a better man than I deserved to destroy. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Inside, a brief letter written in the same shaking script that age and illness had reduced to barely controlled scrawl. "Miss Ashford, if you're reading this, Silas has betrayed both our families. Your father tried to warn me. I was too weak to listen. The briefcase contains evidence he died trying to deliver. Use it to finish what neither of us had the courage to complete. Lorenzo Blackwood." Kira looked up from the letter, throat tight. "What briefcase?" Rhett lifted a locked case from the safe, setting it on the desk between them. He opened it to reveal documents organized with obsessive precision, each page sleeved in protective plastic and labeled with dates and context. But dominating the collection was a USB drive marked with Lorenzo's handwriting. "Final testimony, for Rhett, for Thomas Ashford's daughter, for anyone willing to finish what I lacked the courage to start." The weight of it settled across Kira's shoulders. Her father's vindication, locked inside a device that represented one dying man's attempt at redemption. "There's also banking evidence, financial records that predate what your father discovered. Witness statements from people who've since disappeared. Everything needed to destroy Silas, even if he offers prosecutors cooperation." Dawn crept through gaps in the boarded windows, gray light transforming darkness into the kind of morning that promised rain and revelation in equal measure. Declan slept on the couch, his breathing steady despite the trauma of the past hours. Kira had checked on him twice during the night, monitoring vital signs with the clinical efficiency of someone trained in battlefield medicine. Rhett made coffee in the safe house kitchen, the domestic normalcy surreal against the backdrop of violence and conspiracy. He handed her a mug without asking how she took it. Black, no sugar. The preference of someone who'd learned to drink coffee for function rather than pleasure. "Agent Sutton will meet us at the FBI field office downtown, 9 a.m. We should leave in 40 minutes to account for traffic." Kira nodded, her mind already running through the operational requirements of formal testimony. The evidence would need chain of custody documentation, witness statements coordinated with physical proof, tactical debriefs that reconciled her actions with self-defense statutes, and federal protocols for civilian engagement in active felony situations. Rhett's phone buzzed with an incoming message. His expression darkened as he read the screen. "Detective Faye Brennan wants to interview me about the restaurant shooting. She's requesting I come to police headquarters this afternoon." "Brennan's on Wolf's payroll. That's not an interview request. It's an attempt to isolate you from legal protection while they figure out how to bury this before federal jurisdiction supersedes local control." Then I don't go. You go, but not alone and not on their schedule. We bring Sutton, establish federal primacy, and force Brennan to choose between cooperating with the investigation or exposing herself as an obstruction liability. Understanding crossed his face, along with appreciation for tactical maneuvering that operated within legal frameworks rather than outside them. You think like a soldier, but you maneuver like a lawyer. Army intelligence teaches you to win wars through information dominance rather than overwhelming firepower. The principles translate surprisingly well to civilian applications. They finished coffee in comfortable silence. Two people who'd been strangers 12 hours earlier, now bound together by violence and shared purpose. The transition felt both abrupt and inevitable, as if the universe had been steering them toward this collision point through paths neither could have predicted. At 8:15, they loaded into Rhett's personal vehicle, an armored Mercedes that looked civilian but featured ballistic glass and reinforced panels capable of stopping rifle rounds. Declan remained at the safe house under guard from two of Rhett's few remaining loyal security personnel, men who'd proven their integrity through years of service predating Silas's betrayal. Downtown Seattle emerged from morning fog like a city half-remembered from dreams. Glass towers reflected clouds and possibility. Street vendors opened stalls that would sell coffee and ambition to commuters who'd forgotten what either cost in human terms. The normalcy felt alien after the violence of the previous night, as if the world continued spinning regardless of who died or why. The FBI field office occupied floors 12 through 16 of a federal building that projected institutional authority through architectural brutalism. Agent Nora Sutton met them in the lobby, her face showing the kind of controlled exhaustion that came from a night spent mobilizing resources and navigating bureaucratic obstacles. Pier 41 is a crime scene now. We've got Silas Graves in federal custody with enough charges to ensure he dies in prison, even if half of them don't stick. 4 dead contractors with connections to international arms trafficking, and enough physical evidence to support warrants across 14 different locations tied to Garrett Wolf's organization. She led them toward elevators, her voice dropping as they entered a space where surveillance and secrecy intersected. But here's the problem. Wolf knows we're moving. He's got sources inside local PD that reported the warehouse raid before our evidence teams finished documentation. Seattle PD found Detective Brennan in her apartment at 5 this morning. Single gunshot to the back of the head, execution style. The words hit like a physical blow. Kira's mind raced through implications. Brennan had been the one requesting the interview, which meant she'd been trying to bring Rhett into some kind of protection or coordination before Wolf's remaining forces could eliminate him. Rhett's expression transformed from professional control to barely restrained rage. Wolf's cleaning house. Anyone who can testify against him or connect him to federal charges is now a target for elimination. The elevator opened onto the 12th floor, revealing a bullpen of federal agents working phones and computers with the organized intensity of an investigation reaching critical mass. Sutton guided them to a conference room where evidence boards displayed photographs and connection maps that transformed conspiracy into visual comprehension. Wolf's face dominated the primary board, surrounded by satellite images of known associates and business fronts. Brennan's photograph had been added with a red line through it. Deceased witness, evidence now limited to whatever documentation she compiled before her murder. Brennan had been working undercover for 18 months. We placed her inside Seattle PD specifically to identify corruption and build cases against officers on Wolf's payroll. She was our primary source on the Port Authority conspiracy, and she'd compiled extensive documentation of criminal activity. Sutton pulled up digital files on a laptop, displaying folders containing hundreds of documents. The problem is that most of her evidence is on an encrypted drive that she kept separate from FBI systems for security purposes. We know it exists because she referenced it in her last report, but we don't know where she stored it or how to access it without her alive to provide the decryption keys. Kira processed the tactical situation with rapid analysis. Brennan dead, evidence encrypted, Wolf eliminating witnesses systematically. The investigation was hemorrhaging critical components faster than federal resources could compensate. What about Silas? Is he offering cooperation? Sutton's expression suggested professional distaste. His attorney contacted prosecutors this morning. Silas wants witness protection and reduced sentencing in exchange for testimony against Wolf. Claims he can provide evidence connecting Wolf to 14 murders across 6 states and enough financial documentation to support RICO charges. Rhett's response came immediate and sharp. That's elimination disguised as cooperation. He murders Brennan to remove competing testimony, then positions himself as the prosecution's only source. He controls the narrative and ensures nobody contradicts his version of events. Exactly what I told the prosecutors, but they're desperate for leverage against Wolf, and Silas knows how to exploit institutional pressure. Kira thought about the briefcase in Rhett's safe, the USB drive with Lorenzo's final testimony, the banking records that predated everything Silas could offer prosecutors. Evidence that would destroy his credibility and eliminate any incentive for negotiation. We have something that changes the equation. Documents that establish Silas as a serial killer rather than cooperative witness. Financial records proving embezzlement going back 20 years. And testimony from Lorenzo Blackwood recorded before his death. Sutton's eyes sharpened with professional interest. Can you get it to me today? It's in a secure location. We can retrieve it and have everything documented with proper chain of custody by this afternoon. Do it. If we can file enhanced charges against Silas before his attorneys finalize the cooperation agreement, we kill his negotiating position and force prosecutors to reject the deal. The meeting continued for another hour, establishing protocols and coordinating next steps. By the time they left the federal building, the tactical picture had clarified into actionable strategy. They would retrieve Lorenzo's evidence, deliver it to Sutton with proper documentation, and wait for federal machinery to grind Silas's cooperation offer into irrelevance. But as they drove back toward the safe house, Kira's encrypted phone vibrated with an incoming message from an unknown number. The text contained GPS coordinates and a time, midnight. An address in the industrial district near where her father's old security compound had operated before bankruptcy and dissolution had scattered his assets. No signature, no explanation, just coordinates and the implicit threat that came with unsolicited contact from sources who shouldn't have possessed her number. She showed Rhett the message. His jaw tightened as he processed implications. That's the property Silas purchased using embezzled funds. Legally, it's mine now, transferred after my father's death. But I've never been inside, and I don't know what it's being used for. Someone wants us there at midnight. Either it's a trap, or it's intelligence we're supposed to retrieve. Could be both. Silas had contingency plans for everything. Deadman switches that activate if he fails to check in. This could be automated protocol executing because he's in federal custody. Kira memorized the coordinates and deleted the message. Operational security overriding curiosity. 12 hours until midnight. Enough time to deliver Lorenzo's evidence to Sutton and prepare defenses against whatever waited at those coordinates. Or enough time to convince herself that walking into potential ambush was justified by the possibility of intelligence that could prevent additional casualties. The decision would have to wait. For now, they had evidence to deliver and a conspiracy to dismantle. One document at a time. The Copper Grill had become a shrine of police tape and evidence markers by the time Kira returned that afternoon. Crime scene investigators moved through the dining room with methodical precision, photographing blood spatter patterns and documenting shell casings that told the story of violence in caliber and trajectory. She stood across the street, rain-soaked and exhausted, watching technicians catalog the consequences of choices made in fractions of seconds. Mitchell's daughters would grow up without their father. Dawson's girlfriend would never get the proposal he'd planned. And somewhere in the machinery of federal justice, those deaths would be reduced to case numbers and evidence exhibits. After delivering Lorenzo's briefcase to Sutton, chain of custody documented, every page inventoried, the USB drive logged as critical evidence, Kira had needed to see the place where this nightmare had started. Needed to stand in the space where she'd stopped being invisible and become a participant in violence that had consumed the past 18 hours. Her encrypted phone vibrated. Marcus Hendricks, former Delta Force operator who'd served alongside Thomas Ashford in conflicts that predated official records. He'd gone private sector after retirement, running a security consultancy that specialized in protective details for clients who required discretion alongside competence. She walked 3 blocks to a payphone that still functioned despite the digital age's best efforts at obsolescence, and dialed the number she'd committed to memory years before disaster had scattered her support network. Kira Ashford, 3 years silent, and now you're calling from a Seattle payphone while federal agents are hunting Garrett Wolfe and half the underworld wants you dead. Either you need help or you're calling to say goodbye before doing something stupidly heroic. I need someone I can trust to verify intelligence without federal oversight. Can you run a GPS location against property records and ownership databases? Static crackled across the connection while Hendricks processed the request. Give me the coordinates. She recited the numbers from memory, heard keyboard clicks as Hendricks entered data into whatever proprietary search tools his consultancy maintained for operational purposes. Property belongs to a shell corporation registered in Delaware. Ownership traces back through 6 layers of legal entities before hitting a wall. But the utility bills are paid from an account connected to Blackwood Enterprises, specifically from a discretionary fund that Rep. Blackwood controls personally. The revelation sent ice through Kira's veins. Either Rep was setting a trap, or someone with access to his financial infrastructure was using his resources to orchestrate contact. Neither option inspired confidence. Can you run counter-surveillance on that location? Remote observation to determine if it's staged for ambush or legitimate meeting? I can have eyes on target in 2 hours. But Kira, if this is connected to Wolfe, you're walking into a kill zone designed specifically to exploit your tactical patterns. They know you'll verify before committing. They'll plan for that verification and turn your caution into the weapon that kills you. Then I need you to verify the verification. Third-party observation that confirms whether your surveillance team is being watched by hostile elements. Recursive security until we've eliminated variables down to acceptable risk threshold. Hendricks laughed, the sound carrying grim appreciation. Your father taught you well. I'll deploy 3 teams in overlapping observation patterns. If there's an ambush waiting, we'll identify it before you're in effective range. But I need authorization to employ countermeasures if the situation turns kinetic. Authorized. Rules of engagement are self-defense and asset protection. Nobody dies unless they're actively attempting to kill you or compromise mission success. Understood. I'll call you in 90 minutes with preliminary assessment. The line went dead. Kira replaced the handset and walked back toward the federal safe house through streets that felt progressively more hostile with each block traversed. Surveillance cameras tracked her movement, some legitimate infrastructure, others potentially compromised by hostile elements who'd penetrated Seattle's digital ecosystem. Paranoia and preparation occupied the same tactical space. The difference was whether your assumptions matched reality before bullets started flying. Rhett was waiting in the safe house kitchen when she arrived, his expression carrying the weight of decisions made in darkness. On the table between them sat Lorenzo's briefcase, now empty after its contents had been delivered to federal custody. Sutton called. The USB drive is everything she needed. Lorenzo's video testimony is damning. Names, dates, specific criminal acts going back 2 decades. Combined with the financial records, it establishes Silas as a career criminal rather than a cooperative witness. Prosecutors are already drafting enhanced charges that will make any cooperation deal impossible. Kira felt something unknot in her chest. Not relief exactly, but the recognition that her father's death hadn't been meaningless. Thomas Ashford had tried to expose this conspiracy and died in the attempt, but his evidence, preserved by Lorenzo Blackwood's deathbed conscience, would finally accomplish what he'd set out to do. What about Brennan's encrypted drive? Did Sutton find it? No. They've searched her apartment, her office, every location she frequented. Either Wolfe's people got to it first, or she hid it somewhere we haven't thought to look. The tactical implications expanded into territory where missing evidence became critical vulnerability. Brennan had spent 18 months documenting Wolfe's conspiracy. Without that documentation, prosecution would rely on circumstantial evidence and witness testimony that Wolf's attorneys would systematically dismantle. Kira's phone buzzed. Hendricks calling with preliminary surveillance assessment. 3 observation teams deployed around target coordinates. Initial scan shows the location is clean. No hostile surveillance, no ambush infrastructure, no indicators of trap construction. But here's the interesting part. The building itself is a former military intelligence facility, decommissioned in 2015 and sold to private ownership. Interior layout suggests secure communications capability and hardened construction designed to resist electronic surveillance. Who owns it now? That's where it gets complicated. The Shell Corporation traces back to Blackwood Enterprises, but the specific fund that purchased it wasn't controlled by Rhett or his father. It was established by Silas Graves using embezzled money, then transferred to Rhett's name after Lorenzo's death. Legally, it's Rhett's property, but operationally, it's a facility Silas created for purposes unknown. Kira met Rhett's eyes across the table. Silas is using your property to arrange contact. Either he's setting a trap using infrastructure you technically own, or someone else is attempting communication that bypasses federal monitoring. Silas doesn't have access to outside communication from federal custody. They've got him in isolation pending witness protection processing. He can't coordinate ambushes or send encrypted messages. Unless he arranged contingencies before his arrest. Deadman switches activated if he failed to check in. Automated systems designed to execute predetermined protocols in his absence. The tactical implications expanded into territory where certainty dissolved into probability assessment and risk calculation. Meeting at the coordinates meant walking into circumstances controlled by hostile intelligence with advantages in terrain and preparation. Refusing meant potentially missing information that could prevent additional casualties. Kira checked her watch. 7 hours until midnight. Enough time to prepare defenses that might counter advantages built into the location, or enough time to convince herself that preparation mattered when facing opponents who'd spent years constructing traps specifically designed to exploit her tactical patterns. I'm going, alone. If it's a trap, 1 casualty is acceptable losses. If it's legitimate intelligence, then the information might be worth the risk. Rhett's response came immediate and absolute. No, we go together or neither of us goes. You saved my brother's life. You exposed the conspiracy that's been destroying my family for years. I'm not letting you walk into potential ambush without backup. Your brother needs you. If we both die tonight, Declan inherits an organization still compromised by Silas's infrastructure and facing existential threat from Wolf's remaining forces. Better that one of us survives to protect what matters. Something shifted in Rhett's expression, calculation giving way to the kind of determination that transcended tactical analysis. My father spent his last years being afraid, choosing safety over action until cowardice became the defining characteristic of his legacy. I won't make the same choice. If there's intelligence at those coordinates that helps us destroy Wolf and Silas, then the risk of acquisition is justified regardless of personal cost. The argument carried logic that Kira's military training recognized as strategically sound, even while her protective instincts screamed warnings about acceptable casualties and mission continuation requirements. Midnight found them approaching the coordinates in separate vehicles, along routes designed to identify surveillance through evasive maneuvers and timing variations. Hendricks had maintained observation throughout the evening, reporting no changes in threat assessment, but emphasizing that absence of evidence wasn't evidence of absence when dealing with professionals who understood counter-surveillance doctrine. The building emerged from industrial wasteland like a monument to abandoned ambition. 3 stories of reinforced concrete and narrow windows designed for defense rather than aesthetics. Chain-link fence surrounded the perimeter, topped with razor wire that had rusted to orange decay but remained functional as psychological barrier. Kira parked 2 blocks distant and approached on foot, leaving Rhett to maintain overwatch from elevated position with scoped rifle borrowed from Hendricks's equipment cache. The weapon wasn't designed for offensive operations, but would provide adequate cover fire if extraction under contact became necessary. The front entrance stood unlocked, hydraulic hinges moving silently despite years of apparent neglect. Interior lighting remained functional, LED fixtures providing cold illumination that cast harsh shadows across hallways empty of furniture or equipment. Her boots echoed on polished concrete as she advanced through corridors that opened into a central atrium. At the center, a table held a single laptop computer, screen active, displaying a video file queued for playback. No ambush materialized. No hidden shooters emerged from concealment. Just silence, and the laptop waiting like a test of faith in circumstances designed to inspire paranoia. Kira approached the table with weapon drawn, scanning corners and elevated positions where threats could stage surprise assault. When nothing manifested except empty architecture, she holstered the Glock and pressed play on the video file. Detective Faye Brennan's face filled the screen, recorded in what looked like this very building hours before her murder. The timestamp showed 2:47 a.m. She'd been here, in the darkness, knowing death was approaching, leaving testimony for whoever found it. My name is Faye Brennan, detective with Seattle PD, and deep cover operative for the FBI's Organized Crime Division. If you're watching this, then I'm dead, and Garrett Wolfe has succeeded in eliminating me before I could testify publicly about his conspiracy to seize control of Seattle's Port Authority. Her voice carried the controlled tension of someone delivering testimony under conditions where mistakes meant consequences beyond professional embarrassment. What follows is everything I've documented over 18 months of embedded operations. Names, dates, financial transactions, and evidence of 14 murders orchestrated by Wolfe and executed by contractors whose identities I've confirmed through surveillance and witness testimony. But more importantly, I'm providing evidence of the conspiracy's true scope. Wolfe isn't working alone. He's coordinating with international trafficking networks that use Seattle as distribution hub for weapons, narcotics, and human cargo moving between Asia and North America. The port seizure isn't about local criminal control. It's about establishing infrastructure for transnational criminal enterprises that generate billions in annual revenue. Silas Graves is offering prosecutors cooperation, but his testimony is designed to conceal the international connections that make this conspiracy existentially threatening rather than locally contained. He'll give you Wolfe's domestic operations while protecting the overseas networks that provide capital and logistics. Don't accept his cooperation. Use the evidence I've compiled to prosecute the entire conspiracy from street level to executive leadership. Make them answer for every life destroyed and every system corrupted. Brennan paused, her expression softening slightly. And tell Kira Ashford that her father was right. Thomas tried to expose this conspiracy years before I'd even heard of Garrett Wolfe. He died for attempting to protect systems I've sworn to serve. His sacrifice deserves recognition beyond classified files and forgotten investigations. The laptop contains encrypted files accessible only through biometric verification. Kira Ashford's fingerprints are coded as the primary access key. I pulled her prints from Army records. Forgive me for the invasion of privacy, but I needed to ensure this evidence reached someone who'd use it rather than bury it. Find Wolfe. End him. Not through arrest or negotiation, but through whatever means necessary to ensure he never threatens another life. Some men forfeit their right to legal process through the magnitude of their crimes. Garrett Wolfe is one of those men. The video ended. The screen defaulted to a biometric scanner interface, waiting for fingerprint authentication. Kira pressed her right palm against the laptop's touchpad. The damaged tissue from her Fort Bragg injury created a distinctive pattern that scanners could read despite the scarring. The system processed for 3 seconds, then unlocked. Hundreds of files cascaded across the screen. Financial records, surveillance photographs, witness statements recorded in Brennan's voice and secured with military-grade encryption. The comprehensive documentation of a conspiracy that extended far beyond Seattle's boundaries into international criminal networks that treated human suffering as a commodity to be traded and exploited. Kira extracted the laptop's hard drive, pocketing it with reverence reserved for artifacts that carried the weight of lives lost in service to ideals that outlasted individual mortality. Brennan had died protecting this evidence, trusting that someone would find it and use it to finish the work she'd started. Footsteps echoed from the corridor behind her. Kira spun, weapon rising to acquisition before recognition overrode threat response. Rhett entered the atrium with rifle slung, his expression carrying urgency that suggested circumstances had evolved beyond static observation. Hendricks just called. Coast Guard intercepted radio traffic, suggesting Wolf isn't running to international waters. He's returning to Seattle. Tonight. With enough contractors to execute simultaneous strikes against everyone connected to the federal investigation. The revelation reconfigured tactical reality with the precision of chess pieces rearranging mid-game. Wolf wasn't fleeing prosecution. He was consolidating assets for final assault designed to eliminate witnesses and evidence before federal jurisdiction could protect them. How many contractors? Hendricks estimates between 20 and 30 operators, coordinating through encrypted communications that suggest military-grade organization. They're targeting the federal courthouse where Silas is being held, the FBI field office where evidence is stored, and the safe house where Declan is under protection. Mathematics of violence calculated casualties in real time. Declan faced immediate threat from forces that would overwhelm his security detail through numerical superiority and tactical surprise. Federal facilities possessed defensive infrastructure, but remained vulnerable to coordinated assault by professionals willing to accept casualties in exchange for mission success. And somewhere in Seattle's darkness, Garrett Wolf was orchestrating endgame scenarios designed to erase every threat to his empire through violence that would overwhelm law enforcement's capacity to respond. Kira's mind raced through operational requirements and resource allocation, tactical training synthesizing intelligence into actionable strategy. They couldn't defend all targets simultaneously, couldn't rely on federal response fast enough to prevent casualties, couldn't wait for institutional authority to mobilize resources while people died in the gap between threat identification and protective deployment. We need to make Wolf come to us, force him to commit resources to a target we control, rather than letting him dictate engagement parameters. Rhett's expression suggested he'd reached similar tactical conclusions through parallel analysis. How do we bait a trap that catches someone who spent decades avoiding exactly that vulnerability? Kira pulled the hard drive from her pocket, holding it like the weapon it represented. We tell him we have Brennan's evidence, broadcast it through channels he monitors, make him believe we're vulnerable and isolated with the one thing that guarantees his conviction. He'll come for it personally because he can't trust contractors with something this important. And when he arrives? The words formed before conscience could intercept them, rising from the place where tactical necessity overwhelmed moral certainty. We end him, not arrest, not negotiate, not offer him the chance to escape through legal maneuvering or political connections. We kill Garrett Wolf and accept whatever consequences follow from choosing execution over prosecution. She'd spent 3 years running from the violence that had defined her father's life, had chosen mercy when confronting Silas Graves, because she'd believed justice through institutional process mattered more than personal satisfaction. But Brennan was dead. Mitchell and Dawson were dead. Fletcher and Whitmore were dead. Thomas Ashford had died trying to stop a conspiracy that continued metastasizing through systems designed to prevent exactly this kind of catastrophic corruption. Sometimes the institutions failed. Sometimes justice required individuals willing to step into darkness and deliver consequences that courts couldn't impose and prosecutors couldn't guarantee. Rhett met her eyes with understanding that transcended moral certainty, finding common ground in the territory where principle confronted pragmatism and necessity overwhelmed idealism. My father died a coward because he couldn't make this choice. I won't fail the same way. If killing Wolf is what's required to protect my brother and finish what your father started, then we kill him, and we live with the consequences. They spent the next 2 hours preparing the building for defense, using Hendricks's equipment cache to establish firing positions and fallback routes that would channel assault forces into kill zones, where numerical advantage inverted into tactical liability. Claymore mines positioned at choke points, motion sensors covering approach vectors, and in the center of the atrium, the laptop displaying a fabricated message designed to provoke response through implied threat. At 3 a.m., Kira broadcast a message through encrypted channels that Wolf's intelligence network would intercept within minutes. The text was simple, calculated to trigger the kind of desperate response that would override tactical caution. Have Brennan's complete evidence archive. 18 months of financial records and witness testimony will deliver to federal prosecutors at sunrise unless offered alternative arrangement. Coordinates attached for negotiation. The GPS location pointed to their fortified position, invitation and challenge combined. 30 minutes later, Hendricks called with confirmation that Wolf had taken the bait. We've got radio intercepts suggesting major force deployment toward your coordinates. Estimate 25 contractors equipped for urban assault. They're moving in 3 waves: advanced scouts, primary assault element, and reserve force for exploitation or reinforcement. Professional organization, suggesting someone with military planning experience is coordinating the operation. Time until contact? Advanced scouts will reach your perimeter in 15 minutes. Primary assault element follows 5 minutes later. You're about to get hit harder than anything you faced in theater, and you're doing it with 2 shooters against a platoon strength element that's trained and equipped for exactly this kind of operation. The odds were catastrophic. Survival probability calculated to single digits, even with prepared defenses and superior tactical position. But the alternative was letting Wolf escape to orchestrate additional murders, while institutional justice ground through processes too slow to prevent casualties measured in dozens rather than units. We're committed. If we don't walk out, make sure the evidence reaches prosecutors who'll actually use it. Understood. I've got a quick reaction force standing by 3 blocks out. If you can hold for 15 minutes after contact initiates, I can bring reinforcements that'll even the odds. 15 minutes is a lifetime in combat. Then make sure you live long enough to complain about it later. The line went dead. Kira checked her weapons. Glock with 2 spare magazines, AR-15 rifle borrowed from Hendricks with 6 magazines of 30 rounds each. 193 rounds total against hostile force carrying thousands and willing to expend ammunition at rates sustainable only through overwhelming numerical advantage. Rhett occupied defensive position on the 2nd floor, scoped rifle providing overwatch on approaches, while maintaining fallback option if ground floor became untenable. They discussed last stands and acceptable casualties, and the mathematics of violence that reduced life to tactical variables. Now there was only waiting in darkness, punctuated by the steady rain that had defined Seattle since this nightmare began. Motion sensors triggered at 3:17 a.m., detecting movement along the eastern perimeter. Kira's tablet displayed thermal signatures, 2 figures advancing with tactical spacing that suggested reconnaissance rather than assault. Scouts confirming target location and defensive disposition before primary element committed to engagement. She let them advance, withholding fire to avoid revealing prepared positions. They moved through the building's exterior, scanning windows and doors with weapon-mounted lights that created distinct signatures against the darkness. One approached within 20 feet of a claymore mine, concealed behind decorative landscaping that hadn't been maintained since the facility's decommissioning. The primary assault element arrived at 3:22. 3 SUVs disgorging operators who moved with synchronized efficiency toward the building. 23 contractors, by Kira's count, equipped with body armor and assault rifles configured for close-quarters battle. They breached simultaneously through 3 entry points, flashbangs preceding their advance with concussive detonations designed to disorient defenders and cover the sound of tactical movement. Kira triggered the claymores remotely, explosions ripping through the perimeter and catching 6 contractors in overlapping blast radii. The mine's directional fragmentation transformed steel ball bearings into hyper-velocity projectiles that shredded body armor and human tissue with equal efficiency. Return fire came immediately. Automatic weapons hammering the building's exterior with suppressive fire, designed to fix defenders while assault elements maneuvered for advantageous positions. Rounds punched through drywall and glass, ricocheting off concrete and steel with the distinctive snap-crack of supersonic projectiles passing close enough to kill. Rhett's rifle spoke from above, measured shots targeting contractors who'd exposed themselves during the initial assault. 3 went down in rapid succession, precision marksmanship demonstrating why snipers dominated battlefields where individual skill could negate numerical advantage. Kira engaged targets of opportunity through murder holes she'd prepared in interior walls. AR-15 spitting controlled bursts that dropped contractors attempting to advance through corridors designed to channel their movement into predetermined kill zones. The battle dissolved into chaos punctuated by muzzle flashes and the screams of wounded men. Grenades detonated in enclosed spaces, concussive overpressure bursting eardrums and rupturing organs. Blood painted walls in abstract patterns that would horrify crime scene investigators and provide evidence for prosecutions that might never happen if nobody survived to testify. 10 minutes into the engagement, Kira's ammunition situation approached critical. 3 magazines remaining for the AR-15, 1 for the Glock, 63 rounds against hostile force that had absorbed catastrophic casualties but retained operational capability through sheer numerical advantage. Rhett called down from his position, voice tight with controlled aggression. "They're flanking through the northwest corridor. I can't get angle without exposing myself to the eastern approach. Fall back to secondary position. I'll cover your movement." She laid suppressive fire across the eastern approach, emptying a magazine in controlled bursts that forced hostile elements to seek cover rather than advance. Rhett descended the stairwell at combat speed, boots hammering concrete as he sprinted toward prepared fallback position on the first floor. A contractor emerged from concealment during the transition, weapon tracking Rhett's movement with intent to kill. Kira's remaining rounds were committed to suppression, the AR-15's bolt locked back on an empty magazine. She drew the Glock and fired 3 rapid shots that caught the contractor's center mass, momentum carrying him backward into the wall where he slumped with eyes that no longer saw anything except the darkness that came for everyone eventually. 13 minutes since initial contact. Hendrick's reinforcements would arrive in 2 minutes if they could hold that long. 2 minutes against hostile force that had penetrated the building's interior and was systematically clearing rooms with the methodical efficiency of professionals who understood that victory was inevitable once defenders exhausted their ammunition. Then Garrett Wolfe walked through the main entrance, flanked by 2 bodyguards who moved with the controlled readiness of Tier 1 operators. He looked exactly like his photographs, 48 years old, silver hair, expensive suit that somehow remained immaculate despite the carnage surrounding him. His voice carried through the gunfire and chaos with the absolute certainty of someone accustomed to command. "Cease fire. All elements hold position." The shooting stopped. Contractors froze in tactical positions, weapons trained but fingers indexed away from triggers. In the sudden silence, the sound of Kira's breathing seemed deafening. Wolfe walked toward the center atrium where the laptop still displayed fabricated evidence, his expression carrying mild curiosity rather than concern. "Kira Ashford, Thomas Ashford's daughter. I have to admit, I'm impressed. Most people who interfere with my operations end up dead within 48 hours. You've lasted 3 years and managed to kill or capture most of my Seattle infrastructure in a single night. That demonstrates either exceptional competence or supernatural luck. Your infrastructure was rotten from the foundation. I just exposed the decay." "Perhaps, but exposure without survival is just martyrdom, and martyrs don't collect their victories. So here's my offer. Give me Brennan's evidence, and I'll let you walk away. You and Rhett Blackwood. Your lives in exchange for the laptop. Simple transaction." "And Declan?" "Declan dies, not negotiable. He knows too much about my operations and represents ongoing threat to organizational security. But you and Rhett survived to rebuild the Blackwood family business under my supervision. Better than dying here for evidence that prosecutors will bury through institutional incompetence." The offer carried logic that might have appealed to someone who valued survival over principle. But Kira had watched too many people die protecting ideals that mattered more than individual continuance. Her father, Brennan, Mitchell and Dawson, and all the others whose names would be forgotten except by people who'd loved them. "No deal. Evidence goes to prosecutors. You go to prison or you go to the morgue. Either way, your empire ends tonight." Wolf's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes that suggested the mask of civility was about to drop. Then you both die. And Declan dies. And everyone connected to this investigation dies, because I have resources you can't imagine, an influence that extends into every institution you think will protect you. Kill me and my organization continues without interruption because I'm not the Empire, I'm just the current administrator. Someone else takes my place tomorrow and the work continues. Kira raised the Glock, aiming center mass on a target who stood 15 feet away with bodyguards flanking and contractors positioned to return overwhelming fire the instant she pulled the trigger. Maybe, but you won't be there to see it. The shot that killed Garrett Wolf came from above, Rhett's rifle speaking once with the finality of judicial execution. The round entered Wolf's skull just above the right ear and exited through the opposite side, carrying brain matter and certainty in equal measure. He collapsed without ceremony, expensive suit soaking up blood that pooled across polished concrete. The bodyguards responded instantly, weapons rising toward Rhett's position. Kira shot them both before they could acquire target, double taps that dropped them beside their employer in a tableau of violence that would define the rest of her life. The contractors opened fire, automatic weapons hammering defensive positions with the desperate fury of professionals who understood their operational leadership had just died and survival required immediate victory. Then, Hendrix's quick reaction force breached through multiple entry points simultaneously, fresh operators engaging hostile elements from unexpected angles. The battle lasted 90 more seconds before the surviving contractors recognized defeat and attempted surrender that came too late to prevent additional casualties. When the shooting finally stopped, Kira counted bodies. 18 contractors dead, 4 wounded. 3 escaped into Seattle's darkness, where they'd eventually be hunted down by federal warrants and institutional memory. Rhett descended from his position, rifle slung, face carrying the expression of someone who'd crossed a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. He'd killed the man who'd threatened his family, but the act had transformed him from legitimate businessman attempting to escape criminal legacy into something else entirely. They stood together in the atrium, surrounded by evidence of choices that would define whatever future remained after tonight's violence. Sirens approached from multiple directions, emergency response converging on coordinates that would become crime scene and historical markers simultaneously. Sutton would arrive soon with federal authority and questions that demanded answers neither of them could provide without incriminating themselves in summary execution of a criminal who'd deserved death but hadn't received trial. Dawn was breaking when federal agents finally cleared the building and took their statements. Kira told the truth about everything, except the final moment when Rhett had pulled the trigger on a man who'd been offering negotiation. That detail remained buried in the space between them, shared burden that partnership required carrying together. 3 months later, Silas Graves received life without parole on 18 counts of murder. Lorenzo's video testimony had provided sufficient documentation to overcome any cooperation his attorneys attempted to negotiate. Brennan's encrypted files had supplied the international connections that transformed local prosecution into federal conspiracy charges spanning multiple jurisdictions. The Thomas Ashford Foundation received its operational charter, funded by Rhett Blackwood's legitimate business interests and dedicated to providing scholarships for children of contractors and service members killed in the line of duty. The first recipient was Declan Blackwood, who used the scholarship to attend graduate school for nonprofit management, eventually taking over the foundation's operations. Kira stood before her father's grave at Arlington National Cemetery on a clear morning that carried no rain for the first time since this nightmare began. The flag folded with geometric precision, the 3-volley salute echoing across headstones that stretched to horizons marked by sacrifice. The Army had restored Thomas Ashford's service record to reflect the hero he'd been, rather than the criminal Silas Graves had tried to make him. Full military honors. Presidential Service Medal awarded posthumously. And in the congressional record, a formal acknowledgement that Thomas Ashford had died attempting to expose corruption that threatened national security. She placed a photograph beside the headstone, her father in uniform, American flag behind him, eyes that had seen darkness but chosen to stand against it anyway. The wind carried her words across sacred ground where promises and memories were all that remained of lives spent serving ideals larger than individual survival. You taught me that protection matters more than punishment, that becoming the monster to fight monsters just creates more monsters. I tried to honor that lesson, tried to choose mercy over vengeance when I had Silas Graves bleeding at my feet. She paused, throat tight with the weight of confession. But I let Rhett kill Wolf. Stood there with a weapon and watched him pull the trigger because I believed some men forfeit their right to trial through the magnitude of their crimes. I don't know if that makes me a hypocrite or just someone who learned that principles bend when they collide with reality hard enough. The grave offered no answers, only silence and the certainty that Thomas Ashford would have understood the impossible choices his daughter had faced in darkness. The best way to honor the dead isn't killing their enemies. It's protecting the living they left behind, so their sacrifice means something beyond body counts and casualty reports. You taught me that too. And I'm trying, Dad. I'm trying to build something that matters from the ashes of what you started. She stood, brushing dirt from her knees, and walked away from the grave without looking back. The foundation would open its doors next month. Declan had already identified the first recipients, children whose parents had died in conflicts that most Americans would never know about, sacrifices that went unrecognized except by the families left behind. Mitchell's daughters would receive scholarships. So would the children of Fletcher and Whitmore, and every contractor whose name appeared in Brennan's files. Their fathers had died protecting systems that failed them, but their children would get the education and opportunities that tragedy had stolen. Some burdens were meant to be carried forward rather than buried. Kira returned to Seattle the following week. Rhett had transformed Blackwood Enterprises into a legitimate security consultancy, hiring former military and law enforcement personnel who'd been displaced by budget cuts and organizational restructuring. The company specialized in protective details and risk assessment, building a reputation for competence that slowly erased the criminal associations his father's generation had created. They worked together in the office overlooking Elliott Bay, partnership forged through shared trauma, evolving into something that resembled friendship. Neither spoke about the night Garrett Wolfe had died. Neither needed to. Some conversations happened in the silences between words, in the understanding that certain choices couldn't be unmade, and certain consequences required acceptance rather than absolution. On the anniversary of that night, Kira received a package with no return address. Inside was a single item, Detective Faye Brennan's badge, polished to a mirror shine, accompanied by a note in handwriting she didn't recognize. She would have wanted you to have this. You finished what she started. That matters more than how it ended. A friend. Kira placed the badge on her desk beside the photograph of her father. Two people who died trying to do the right thing in a world that punished righteousness more often than it rewarded it. Two people whose sacrifices had finally accomplished what they'd set out to achieve, even if neither had lived to see it. The intercom buzzed. Rhett's voice carried through the speaker with the professional tone he used for business communications. "We have a new client. Senator's daughter, receiving credible death threats. Family wants personal protection detail during campaign season. Can you handle the initial assessment?" Kira picked up the file, scanning threat analysis and security requirements with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent years turning tactical problems into operational solutions. "I'll take it. Schedule the meeting for tomorrow morning." She closed the file and looked out across Seattle's skyline, watching rain clouds gather over the bay. The city looked different now. Not safer exactly, but cleaner somehow, as if the corruption that had rotted its foundations had been cut away, leaving space for something better to grow in its place. Her phone buzzed with a message from Declan. The foundation's first scholarship ceremony was scheduled for next month. 23 recipients. 23 families given hope where tragedy had left only grief, not redemption. She didn't believe in redemption anymore, if she ever had, but perhaps something close enough to matter. The recognition that the living could honor the dead by building futures those lost souls would never see. Kira stood and walked to the window, pressing her scarred palm against the cool glass. The rain was coming. She could feel it in the damaged tissue, phantom ache that preceded every storm. Some wounds never fully healed. Some scars remained tender decades after the violence that created them. But scars also proved survival. Evidence that you'd faced darkness and come through the other side. Changed, but intact. She'd killed men in that building. Watched Rhett execute Garrett Wolfe without intervention. Chosen violence over law when institutional justice proved inadequate to the magnitude of crimes committed. Those choices would follow her forever. Weights carried alongside the certainty that she'd do it all again if circumstances demanded it, because some things mattered more than moral purity. Some fights required getting blood on your hands to ensure the innocent survived. Her father had understood that. So had Brennan. And now Kira understood it too. The terrible knowledge that protection sometimes demanded becoming the very thing you stood against. And living with that contradiction was the price of actually making a difference. The rain began to fall, washing Seattle clean for another day. Somewhere in the city, people were safe because of choices made in darkness by individuals willing to bear the cost of those decisions. That would have to be enough.